Good morning, and thank you for coming to this media conference on the commencement of key aspects of the National Conservation Law. My name is Angela Piercy. I'm with the Ministry of Environment. And with us this morning, we have on our panel the Minister of Environment, Wayne Panton, the Director of the Department of Environment, Gina Ebanks-Petrie, and the Chairperson of the National Conservation Council, Ms. Christine Rose Smith. After the three of them give their presentations, we will open the floor for questions. And at this point, we will begin.
Good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Angela, for the introduction. Everyone will, or probably have heard the statement or read the report of it in the media that I issued in the Legislative Assembly last week in relation to the commencement of certain very significant parts of the National Conservation Law. The law, just to step back and remind everyone, has been an issue that was outstanding for a very long time, more than 10 years in the making. When we took office in 2013, it was something that we had committed to. It was a part of our manifesto promise to the country. We took that forward. We addressed the issues. We did subsequent consultations. And what that resulted in was a lot of great feedback. We then had a number of amendments to the law in committee stage when that was brought forward. Those amendments, in the vast majority of them, I think there was about 33, 30 of those, as I recall, were amendments which were adopted by the government, proposed by the government to reflect comments which had been addressed, and also issues that we subsequently thought about. Three of the proposed amendments were adopted from proposals from the opposition. We then, so that was 2013, it passed. We then in 2014, after a period of assessing what we needed to do to move forward and deal with implementation, we commenced parts 1 and 2, and we then proceeded to appoint the National Conservation Council, which was the body which was going to deal with the administration of the National Conservation Law and bring that into effect. We have the chairman this morning of the National Conservation Council, Ms. Christine Rose Smith, who will be addressing issues with you subsequently. Today is Earth Day around the world, and it is significant to us that today is the commencement day of significant parts of the National Conservation Law. So we have parts 3, 4, and 6 of the law, which have been commenced effective today. We have section 50, which is the section under the law which empowers Cabinet to issue regulations under the law. And we also have schedules 1, 3, and 4 of the law, which are coming into effect. Now, you will hear more detail in relation to the specifics of those provisions from Ms. Gina Ebanks-Petrie, who is the head of the Department of Environment. But just briefly, parts 3 and 4 deal with conservation of land, conservation of wildlife, and enforcement of the law, respectively. This legislative framework is one which represents an overarching approach to conservation in this country. I think many of us will know that we have had marine conservation legislation in place and marine parks in place since the mid-1980s. That has served us well in relation to the marine parks, but we also have had the benefit of a lot of empirical analysis, empirical evidence, and we know that while that has served us well, we need to improve on that, we need to build on that in order to ensure that we have a sustainable interaction and use of our very critically important marine environment. This law also brings together the overarching approach of covering terrestrial conservation, wetlands conservation, along with marine conservation. So it has been a long time coming. we are now in a great position to have to be able to commence substantially more aspects of it, and we anticipate by the end of this year we will be able to commence the remaining two parts, parts 5 and parts 7 of the law. Importantly for us, one of the comments that we've heard during the consultation period and subsequently is that people find or people want enforcement to be a high priority. Schedule 4, Part 6, pardon me, of the law deals specifically with enforcement. In the past, conservation officers have not had the power effectively to deal with enforcement. Today, they're being given that power. They will have the power to arrest, to detain, and they will have equipment authorized to them to effect that in the most expeditious manner. So that's a very significant change for us. That is something which is, I think, should make a lot of people happy, considering the concerns that have been expressed over time in relation to enforcement. I think at this point, I will probably hand it off to Ms. Gina to talk more about the specifics, and then, of course, subsequently we'll hear from Ms. Christine.
Thank you, Minister Panton. Good morning, everyone. As most of you will probably guess, I'm very pleased indeed to be here speaking with you about the commencement of parts 3, 4, and 6 of the conservation law. These really are the sort of meat of the conservation law, insofar as part 3 of the law deals with the conservation of land, which includes the marine environment. Part 4 deals with our wildlife protection, conservation measures. And as Minister Panton pointed out, Part 6 is the section that deals with penalties for violations of the law, but also gives the Department of Environment's conservation officers their much needed and long awaited powers to enforce the conservation legislation. In terms of the specifics of what these parts of the law will actually allow us to achieve on the ground, Part 3 of the law really is going to allow us, for the first time ever in our history, to be able to really look at a comprehensive system of protected areas in our country. Many of you know that we have marine parks. We've had marine parks, marine protected areas for almost 30 years, but we have not had a legal framework that will allow us to set up a complementary system of protected areas on land. And so this legislation will allow us to do that. In anticipation of the law commencing, the Department of Environment, the National Trust, and the scientific and technical members of the National Conservation Council actually participated in a workshop that was facilitated by the Nature Conservancy yesterday and on Monday, where we actually started the work of looking at developing a comprehensive system of protected areas on land. So we've started that work. We've got a long way to go, but we've certainly done a lot of thinking around a systematic approach to protected areas on land that will, utilize the data and the information that we have collected, and that will have a sort of a more scientific basis for setting up the system of protected areas on land. And we're excited about this because we think that it will allow the National Trust, the Department of Environment, everyone to sort of be on the same page in terms of what that system of protected areas should look like on the islands. Part 4 is all about the protection of wildlife, and here again, very significant changes to the legal framework for conservation of species in the country. For the first time ever, we're going to have protection measures put in place for many of our endemic plants and animals. Some of you will remember me talking when we had the sort of information sessions leading up to the passage of the law about the fact that none of our endemic plants had any legal protection. What we have now is through Schedule 4, Schedule 1, under Part 4, we have some species of our plants, for example, our endemic ghost orchid, the Cayman sage, our Old George, the endemic Hohenbergia, found only in the ironwood forest in its natural environment. All of these species will have automatic full-time protection now under the law. Bats, for example, our only native mammals, had no protection previously. This means now the commencement of this section means that these animals will be protected. We'll also have protection automatically for sharks and rays in the marine environment. So we're very excited about the fact that we're going to not only have full-time protection for some of our more rare endemics, but also that other endemics that are more abundant will be able to have conservation plans written that will actually allow us to ensure that we treat these species in a way that means that their use when they are actually used are that the conservation measures put in place mean that we can have a sustainable approach to the whole question of species conservation in our country. As Minister Panton mentioned, Part 6, really the important part for us is that our officers, our conservation officers, will finally have powers to go out and enforce legislation. They will, for the first time, be recognized in legislation, and then they are going to have powers of arrest. They will be able to carry batons and handcuffs, etc. They've already had training from the RCIP on the proper use of this equipment, and we're putting in place internal operational policies to ensure that we have proper procedures in place that will complement the provisions of the law. So we are very, very pleased, and we feel that this is going to actually make a significant difference on the ground for us in terms of our ability to give and to enact practical conservation measures for so many of the species in our country and the habitats that have not yet had any means of legal protection. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of the National Conservation Council, I'm also very pleased that we're able to be here today confirming the enactment of the major part of the conservation law. The Conservation Council was appointed as part of the first phase of the implementation, and just to explain, its members are comprised of district representatives from all of the islands, and the members have individual expertise in various areas of conservation, biodiversity. For myself, I've been living in the Cayman Islands for 25 years, and when I first arrived, I was a marine biologist. I seem to have migrated to the land, and my interests now are, in particular, our endemic Cayman Islands orchids. So the Council is very pleased. We'd like to congratulate the Minister and the Director for many long, hard years of bringing this law into effect. It's appropriate that this Earth Day theme is our turn to lead. And that raises two ways of looking at it. One is the people of the Cayman Islands taking the lead on our environmental protection matters. And the other way to look at it is our leaders stepping up and leading in this area as well. So I'd first of all like to extend the congratulations to the people of the Cayman Islands. You're the people who drove forward the environment as a national issue. The theme, Our Turn to Lead, also immediately says, well, we have to continue and improve on our individual actions. because it's little individual actions make the difference and create the environment we all want to live in, as well as the protection for our biodiversity environment as well. So that theme asks us to continue and improve our individual actions. It also, I believe, prompts us to call on our community and elected leaders to step up as well. So I'm going to encourage all of the people of the Cayman Islands, in addition to the green actions they may have been taking today, making sure they took their cloth bags to shop, the carpooling they've been doing, all of these individual actions. Call your community leaders, your district committees, your MLAs, the councillors, the cabinet members and ministers, and let them know that you support the government's adoption of a duty of care to the Cayman Islands environment. And to paraphrase our Constitution, that's in order to promote the sustainable well-being of our community across all of the 3 islands. So tell them why you think protecting our environment is important to you. It will aid us all in implementing our conservation law to the best of our possible ability. So in closing, for my own comments, I'd like to think that this media conference is the first in maybe what will become on Earth Day in the Cayman Islands in future, an annual State of the Environment address, and that it won't be just us here, it'll be other members of our community and government, and maybe in the years to come, it'll be our successors reporting further successes and inviting what next, what should we do next to keep it all going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, and Gina, thank you for your detailed contribution there. I think just to round out at this point, I think where we're at now with the implementation of the law certainly represents a milestone event for Cayman, bringing together, as I said earlier, conservation and protection for our marine environment and our terrestrial environment. And the law in the final parts 5 and 7 that will be implemented later this year or commence later this year, they will bring together the final full picture of ensuring that decisions that are made in this country by any entity that may have an impact in relation to our environment will require that the environment be taken into account in some way. So, for example, the Central Planning Authority at this point has by virtue of a gentleman's agreement, consults with the Department of Environment. That gentleman's agreement is going to be set out is in the law, and it will be commenced later this year, which will then make sure that there is an obligation to consult with the National Conservation Council on issues which may have an impact on our environment. So we're bringing together the various pieces to ensure that we have and we pursue sustainable development in this country. And that, at the end of the day, is what is really important for us. We live on small islands in the Caribbean. We recognize the value of our environment. We have a tourism industry that is highly dependent on that environment being in a wonderful and pristine condition. Otherwise, we wouldn't have tourists coming here. But it's also very critical to us as residents, as Caymanians. It impacts significantly on our quality of life. It impacts on our national psyche. So we feel that where we're at now, is a tremendous achievement for Cayman, for Caymanians, and importantly for our environment. I think at that point, I would just also add, I suppose in keeping with the comments from Ms. Christine Rose Smith, that what I would like to see is an increased amount of attention being paid to our environment, to our, for example, what we do with garbage, what we do with refuse. We all know that we have significant issues in relation to that. The government's at this point engaged in a process of consultation and having a committee and a consultant hired specifically to address this issue and create or recommend a strategy going forward, which will encompass all the various aspects of our refuse management. But we can start today, ladies and gentlemen, by ensuring that we don't litter our environment. We deal appropriately with our refuse. We deal responsibly with it. Last Saturday was the Earth Day cleanup activities in Cayman, and I spent a good number of hours in the morning, as did many, many people in this country, out doing our part to help clean up. I'd like next year and the years to come to not have so much of that to clean up, because it is depressing when you see the lack of respect which is paid to our natural environment, to our surroundings by refuse, garbage, bottles, cans, which are just discarded irresponsibly. Please, those of you who perhaps have thoughtlessly done this in the past, please think about it in the future. Please avoid doing that. And for my part, and for the government's part, we're going to continue to do what we can to assist in this respect. The National Conservation Law that we have 80% now brought into effect is going to contribute substantially in that area. And of course, the refuse management strategy that we are implementing will significantly contribute as well. But as residents, as citizens in this country, we all have to do our part in that respect. I know we all share the pride of being in a country that is beautiful, and that we should want to preserve that environment, want to preserve that feeling that we have and the quality of life that we enjoy. Thank you all very much, and have a great day.
Can I go now?
We can take questions now.
Joe Avery, Cayman 27. My first question would be about Part 6. With the new powers of enforcement that you outlined, are there enough bodies, boots on the ground to actually make a difference? Because it seems right now that there's no one at Stingray City to enforce anything as it is. Is the manpower there? Is this going to be something that's basically toothless because you've got 5-6 guys covering the whole island?
You're good. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yes, I mean, I think that it actually will make a huge difference. The fact that our officers will actually have some power to do something out there will I think, be a deterrent to those people who want to willingly violate the law. We are actually, the department is in the process of hiring 2 new officers. In fact, we've hired them. They will join us later in May, one at the beginning and one in mid-May. So I think that it will make a difference. I mean, it is not going to be possible for us to have enough officers to cover the entire coastline and land mass of the 3 islands all the time. So this is why I think it's important that we do get the message home to people that there is a personal responsibility when it comes to the environment and to adhering to the environmental legislation that we do have. Because the government will simply never be in a position to really, have enough officers to cover the entire coastline and the land now under this legislation. So people are going to have to internalize what it means, what our environment means, how valuable it is to all of us, and to the country's economy in the long run, and to all of our well-being, and really start to exhibit behaviors that ensure that we do all respect the environment and that we can all continue to benefit from it in the long term.
Does Part 6 include any provisions to make it easier for government to prosecute in the event of anchor and chain damages to coral reef? I know it broke my heart to know after August 27th's Carnival Magic incident that nobody was held accountable. They named 3 parties in the DOE report, and none of those were held accountable under any sort of prosecution. And just in March, there was a mega yacht that dropped anchor on a dive site up there. 2 weeks ago, an anchor was found on the Eden Rock site. And it just seems every time that something like that happens, or in the event of the barge that leaked oil into the North Sound last summer, that they're like, well, we can't prosecute because of this technicality or this, we're just an inch away from being able to do something. And it just breaks my heart every time something like that happens to see that. Will Rule 6 or Section 6 address any of these shortcomings on enforcement?
Yes, it will. The current marine conservation law requires that we prove intent, which is a very high legal bar. So the Section 6 actually is a strict liability section. It doesn't require the department to prove intent. So damage is damage, and it doesn't qualify that damage, that it has to be by an anchor or a chain. So hopefully it will make it easier for us to move on some of these more disturbing events.
I think just to add to that very quickly, I agree with you that those events have been disturbing, very unfortunate, and we have had issues with our ability to enforce. But I think that doesn't detract from the fact that we have also been having discussions with the parties who have been involved, and we have reached certain conclusions with them in relation to contributions which they will make to helping to defray the costs involved in remedying or mitigating the damage which has been caused. So while we have not had strict enforcement measures on some of these situations, we have on others where it was easier and clearer in relation to prosecution and enforcement. We have nevertheless reached a position where there has been mitigation and there has been contributions to costs. So in that respect, we are relatively satisfied. But certainly this law is going to put us in a much better position to prosecute if necessary and to demonstrate that this sort of approach is not going to be tolerated, and that we require more care and attention to be brought by those who are interacting with and operating within our marine environment.
Good morning, everybody. Wayne from CNS. Can I drill down and ask some questions specifically about habitat conservation and what plans you have? I mean, obviously, Ginny, you've been doing this for years and years, and you know exactly what needs to be preserved. Has there been any locations, because I presume, first of all, it's Crown land, any Crown land that you've identified that you would like to have tied up under some conservation or protection law as soon as possible? And can you give us an idea of the priority places and how quickly you will be able to get it protected?
Okay. I'm not sure if you were here when I was talking about the workshop we've just completed. So with Nature Conservancy assistance. So the idea, Wendy, is that we will actually look at what we currently have under protection and then assess gaps in the protection from a habitat perspective. So we need to set some goals that will help us meet international standards in terms of amount of habitat under protection in specific habitat types, even drill down that far. And then also our own local goals that we have agreed between organizations that work in land conservation in the island, so including the National Trust, for example, and the government and the National Conservation Council. So I don't have a specific plan yet because we're just beginning to develop the plan. The idea is that we will take a look at those areas that we have identified as important already. We have data, obviously, on species-specific requirements in some cases. Where particular areas where an individual plant is only found in that particular location, for example, or an animal is only found in that particular location. So we know that information for some of our endemics, and we will use all of that information to help guide our plan for a system-wide approach to protected areas. So I don't think, obviously we were going to have to take into account areas that are already well under protection, as I said before, like the mastic, for example. The mastic's primarily a dry forest type of reserve, so we will need to look at what does that mean in terms of the percentage of dry forest that we have under protection on Grand Cayman. What's the gap, and what's the sort of most efficient way to meet that gap between what we have under protection and our goals that we've set. So that's what these workshops were. That's the process that these workshops initiated in the last 2 days, and we're going to continue on into May and June working on that whole plan.
Okay, that makes sense. Because obviously we were talking about earlier, you're saying that stuff like the Old George and the ghost orchid are already now protected, so no one can go pick a ghost orchid today.
Correct.
So obviously it does only occur in a very, very few places. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier the Old George, which is also in the Ironwood Forest behind the university. Mm-hmm. So would you be in a position to say that would be a primary, those kind of environments would be the priority environment? So somewhere like the Ironwood Forest, and I think there's a place up in Northside where the Cayman sage is, isn't it, where it's limited to there. Mm-hmm. So is that where we're likely to see the first protected habitats coming? Or am I making you jump the gun?
You're making me jump the gun, but also I just want to make it really clear that before we can establish any protected areas, the law requires the Crown to own the land. So that is also a hurdle that we have to overcome. But in addition to that, it also requires the council to take the proposals for protected areas out for public consultation and receive feedback on those within a 90-day period. So, there are steps. There's a process that has to be followed before we can actually declare any protected areas on land, any new protected areas on land. Obviously, our current animal sanctuaries, for example, will be carried over as protected areas under the National Conservation Law. So to the extent that we have some of those left, we will have some protected areas on land now. Yes.
Can I just clear that?
Yes. The minister has just reminded me that the end point of the process, of course, the public consultation process, is that once the council takes on board the public feedback, it will then either amend its proposal for the particular protected area that's being considered, or send the original proposal up with all of the public input to Cabinet, who will make the final decision as to whether the protected area is actually put in place or not. So ultimately, it's Cabinet who decides on the establishment of protected areas.
Just very quickly, I forgot, the ghost, not the ghost orchid, the banana orchid now, as it's our national flower, is it protected today?
It is.
Because it wasn't yesterday, was it?
No, it wasn't. Many things are protected today that weren't protected yesterday.
So I just thought it's
very
important.
exciting.
Because you only gave a few examples, so I imagine there's a list available now.
I couldn't list them all. The minister is
But
already...
where can we see that list? That would be quite good.
Well, it's part of the law. It's the schedule to the law.
Okay, so it's actually all the things that are now protected are in that schedule.
Yes, there's a part
great.
1 schedule, which has things that receive protection immediately. And there's part 2 to Schedule 1, which lists all of our species that are either protected through regulations that already exist, or that will be protected through the provisions of conservation plans that we have to write and submit again to Cabinet for approval.
Hi, it's me again.
Hi.
I just had another question because the theme of this is what our time to lead. Is that right for the Earth
That's
Day?
International Earth, Day's
Day.
theme, yes.
Okay, and so in light of that, with coral restoration in particular, if you look around the region, you can look to Bonaire and Curacao as like kind of the leaders in that, aggressively pursuing projects to have coral nurseries. And I know that we've just gotten on board, I guess in November or December, with our own initiatives to do that. Is there any intent or plans to maybe make ourselves the islands to look to in terms of coral restoration? As I mentioned before, our reefs are under assault by ships and anchors and lionfish and acidification and rising ocean temperatures. We established Cayman as the world's first underwater playground, really. So, is there any intent to maybe go more out on the leadership edge on that?
I think that to the extent that the DOE's position for years has been that to the extent that we can protect the coral reefs that we have in situ, that is our preference. Coral reefs are a very complex system of species and organisms that actually can't very easily be restored. So it is much better to protect the reefs that we have. So let's just, have that as a sort of basis from which we now can discuss restoration. Restoration of coral, I think, is definitely has a place. It has there is a really important contribution to be made with species like the branching corals, which are fast growing, etc. And the DOE has proposed a policy to Cabinet, and Cabinet has approved that policy that will allow us to have nurseries set up that are properly managed, that allow us to actually select donor sites for the grown coral, the cultivated coral, in a way that makes sense, that is consistent with the life history of the corals, etc. So I think we are actually in a really good position in Cayman. And interestingly, we had a discussion with some marine specialists from the Nature Conservancy who were saying that, in many respects, the fact that we took the time to think about a policy and how we would manage this activity will be beneficial to us, because they are now having to go back and having sort of promoted the idea of coral restoration and actually, yes, wind it back in and set policy frameworks and set sort of, objectives for this whole exercise, et cetera, that makes sense, because they're running into many, many problems in an unregulated environment. I was told, I didn't actually know this, but apparently the BVI has taken our policy document and basically amended it for their purposes. So it seems, Joe, that we already are leaders. You just didn't know it. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, obviously we're not going to discount the role that coral restoration has to play here. But I think that it is really important that people understand that it is not possible to fully restore a coral reef that has been damaged. It's just what you're dealing with is way too complex an environment. We can't grow everything that has been lost. So that is a part of this whole idea and concept that worries me, is that it sounds on the surface as if, oh, yes, we can damage it because we can restore it. Well, actually, that's not true. We can restore very, very small components of what has been lost.
Shanda Gallego from Radio Cayman. We are celebrating Earth Day. You mentioned, Mr. Panton, the cleanup that took place last week. Those are some of the activities that has been happening. What are some of the other activities that are taking place in celebration of Earth Day?
I have to tell you right now that I'm not sure what other activities we have going on today. I was certainly aware of the cleanup that was being done on Saturday. There were a number of organizations that were involved with that. Primarily, it was organized by the Chamber of Commerce, but there were ministry staff that were involved with it. There were many private companies that were involved with it. My own Progressive Party was involved with it. So I can't tell you what else has been going on. Unless Christine wants to add something.
I can mention on behalf of the National Trust, they held a day at the Botanic Park in conjunction with the park that was leading nature tours in the park, informational sessions. The children were there free. It was a well-attended event. Saturday, of course, is the day a lot of things happen, as opposed to Earth Day itself when it falls on a weekday. And I'm aware that there are a number of different entities in the Cayman Islands, people who promote sustainable actions that have had different promotions going on. Even
the DOE itself has been our Earth Day theme this year has been sort of running for a month, and we have, with the kind assistance of CNS, been doing surveys just to get to raise awareness of the whole issue of individuals' carbon footprint, and what small actions we can individually take to mitigate our impact on the environment. So we've been surveying mostly on issues relating to the emission of greenhouse gases, but specifically today, we committed as a department to take alternative transport to work. So some of us carpooled, some of us sailed in, paddle-boarded, kayaked, walked. So we did sort of various things to commemorate our individual theme for Earth Day this year.
All right. And of course, you guys mentioned earlier that we are based on keeping our islands clean. I just had a visitor the other day saying to me, wow, Cayman just keeps their streets clean at all times. And we pride ourselves in that, but I think the awareness part is lacking just a little bit, in my opinion. But I do want to ask, what are some of the things that you're going to be doing going forward? More campaigns, more public consultations, more awareness programs? What are some things that we can do to help our community members to be more aware of what they can do?
Well, I think for my part, in terms of the ministry, what I'd like us to do is get to a point where we don't recognize that there's an Earth Day once a year. We recognize that Earth Day is every day of the year. We have to get to a mindset where that continues to be reflected in our daily activities. I hear what you say in relation to the comments from visitors, and that is wonderful to hear, and it's true. But they're comparing Cayman relative to other places as well. If you are participating in the Earth Day activities and you drive along our roads, you will see litter. If you go to areas that are wooded, forested, that are green, you can find lots of refuse, bottles, cans that have been tossed aside in there. It seems to me that a lot of people feel that if an area is wooded, if it's green, it's a good place to discard it, it won't be noticed. That's not the case. It has a big impact. Those are areas that we should keep clean just as well as any other areas where people live. We have to deal with the problem in this country. We have to change the mindset that people have of just tossing things out the window. From a ministry perspective, I will continue to focus on this. I will continue to try to drive that message home, and I will also be having discussions with colleagues as to what we can do to essentially increase the penalties for littering and try to make them more enforceable. because I think it is important for all of us. It is critical to our environment. It's important to our quality of life as people here. People enjoy the surroundings we have, and it's critically important to our tourism industry.
All right. Just moving on to more questions. In regards to the public consultation, you mentioned that enforcement was a high priority. What were some of the other concerns or some of the other things that they pitched out?
Well, it's a little bit difficult to recall a lot of the specifics, but I think, in general, one of the themes was enforcement, and sometimes that was used as a justification for maintaining the status quo. In other words, for not having the new law in place. I think there were other concerns about how the law would operate, and whether it would somehow restrict development, for example. And I think both in terms of the communication and the education that we did in the process, and also taking into account some of the concerns and comments that were raised in terms of amendments that we made to the law, I think we reached a suitable compromise which allows the law to operate, to provide the benefits, but also significantly allows sustainable development to occur in the country, because we recognize it's not in our interest to have a law which prevents economic growth, which prevents sustainable development in any significant way. So there is a balance to be achieved. I think the law at this point achieves that balance, and when it's fully implemented, and I dare say within 3 to 5 years, I think it will be recognized as a law which does reflect that necessary balance. I'm not saying it's not going to require some tweaks down the road. Perhaps it will. But I think certainly what we have now is a good start, and it reflects many of the concerns, many of the on both sides of the issue that were articulated.
Okay, and of course, I'm not sure, Ms. Christine Rose-Smith, if you mentioned when the next council meeting is going to be taking place. Can you give us just an update on as to what the council will be doing in the next meeting?
The next council meeting is the 26th of May, and we will be putting out the notice and agenda for that later on towards the beginning of May. The agenda is not yet settled for it, but it will be looking at some of the additional measures that need to take place in order for parts 5 and 7 of the law to be implemented, the role that the council has to take in some of those areas. For example, the management of the Environmental Protection Fund is one of those areas.
Just to add to that, so in relation to Part 7, we have already commenced doing some work in relation to that. We have approved the drafting instructions for the environmental impact assessment regulations, and that once that is complete, that will then facilitate us being in a position to act on recommendations and have Cabinet issue the necessary commencement order in respect of the remainder of the law. But there is still work to be done. There is work that's ongoing at this point, and I'm confident that the work of the National Conservation Council, they're doing a fantastic job, I think, ably led by Christine. I think that will bear fruit, and we will have a fully implemented national conservation law by the end of this year. The country will have all the benefits that flow from that.
A quick question. In regards to the new officers, it's 2 new officers that are going to be implemented in May next month. How frequent or how often are we going to be seeing training of the officers in regards to making sure that they're implementing and protecting as best as possible?
Well, we've already had those officers trained, and we've put our serving officers through training as well, to bring them up to speed with some of their new powers, and just to ensure that they understand and can operate under procedures to do with arrest. We have also our new Constitution that we need to take into account in terms of the provisions of the Constitution, making sure that we're compliant with that. So all of our officers, including our 2 new officers, have been trained already. So we keep up to speed with training, periodically updating, as necessary, really.
So the powers that they're going to have in terms of enforcement are powers which are equivalent to police constables. So a lot of the training, and in fact, all the training has been done by
Our CIP.
Our CIPS.
Yeah.
So that should certainly put those officers in a good position to be able to appropriately exercise those powers going forward.
Can we just confirm it? Is it 7 in total officers?
I believe that's a correct number, yes.
So obviously we can't expect them to do it all on their own. Have we got some kind of public reporting line in place? So if right now somebody sees somebody picking a banana orchid, they can go get them.
Well, we've always had a public reporting line in place. We're obviously going to make sure that that's well publicized. But in addition to that, the law also provides that the council can appoint conservation wardens who will be the volunteer equivalent of our officers. They won't have all of the powers of the officers for obvious reasons, but they will be able to assist with the enforcement of the provisions of the law. So that will be something that we will be making once we have had the discussion, the department has had the discussion with the council, and decisions have been made about how we actually roll that provision out. We will actually be dealing with that later.
And Wendy, your comment is certainly valid. We will not have enough officers to cover all of the environment, but that's where, to a large extent, an ongoing education campaign is important. And as we do with policing or society, we will have to rely very significantly on information from those members of society who observe offenses or improper activities being carried out. Any other questions? Thank you all very much once again. I appreciate you being here.